the hunger isn't associated with like panic or worry or concern, because, and is very easily endured and not that severe, because I have the next meal planned out, and then I could go into where I put my calories.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. And I think that's a big talking point we'll be covering today, which is the idea that, you have to manage hunger in a way where you create this cognitive construct around, this is how I feel, but this is why I feel this way, and this is what I can do. I don't have to act on that feeling necessarily. So using that self-control and that delayed gratification of knowing that the meal is coming up. So to dive in, what do you know about hunger as a sensation? Do you have any background on it?
Not from a purely biological or scientific perspective, which must be really interesting. There must be a lot of anthropologists out there that study the role of hunger in our survival and how the body processes it, what happens with the brain. That sensation, I'm sure, taps into some old primordial stuff and some fears about not knowing necessarily where the next meal was coming from for our ancestors.
Absolutely. And we have a hormonal imprint that lets us know when it's time to eat. And some of the foods that we eat, the hyper processed foods, they override that to a certain extent because they're so hyper palatable. But generally, true hunger still exists for most people, but they don't necessarily touch it that frequently because we have such an abundance of food. But I'm glad that you brought up sort of that historical precedence for this and evolutionary sort of precedent for hunger, right? So it's a signaling system that lets us know that we need calories or energy to sustain survival. And there's two hormones that are in play basically to let us know when we're hungry and then when we're full or satiated, right? So we have these two hormones, leptin and ghrelin. So leptin is the hormone that signals that we're full or we're satiated, and then ghrelin is the one that lets us know that we're hungry or we need to eat. And that's the one that's tricky for a lot of people. There's actually several drugs that are in trial right now where they're trying to control ghrelin release and things like that to try to mitigate hunger for people that are struggling to eat well or to diet. But biologically, when we've gone a significant time without calories or we're in a calorie deficit, like with a diet, there may be an abundance of ghrelin in our system, which is very true hunger. Now, there's a difference between what I like to call true hunger and false hunger. So have you ever heard of stress eating before?
Yes, absolutely. I believe I have engaged in this activity.
As have I, and as have we all, I feel like, to a certain extent. So there's sometimes, because the consumption of food can provide comfort and feelings of safety and security, sometimes there's a misassociation with the consumption of food from hunger or other triggers in the environment. So those things can be stress or fatigue. So it could be emotional stress, psychological stress, physical fatigue, emotional fatigue, things like that. So when we get into those states, we may be actually seeking rest, recovery, or safety. And instead of pursuing activities that provide those, we're programmed to seek food because it gives us an immediate response to that, even though it doesn't actually address the underlying issue. So many times when people are tired or fatigued, not only do they have their biochemistry working against them, meaning low blood sugar and things like that can trigger ghrelin, but it could be an emotional association with, I feel discomfort, I go for food because it provides comfort. So one thing that I always try to stress with clients is a moment of pause when we feel like we want food and say, am I truly hungry? Now, have you practiced that at all yourself?
Yes, I haven't always succeeded at it, but yes, I will definitely try. Like, food becomes an activity, snacking. Sometimes we feel like we need to snack. I will often try to assess whether that feeling, actually food needs to be placed there or not.
And if you don't mind sharing, what does that conversation look like internally? How do you address yourself? How do you talk through that?
Well, as I stumble over my words, there's a lot of us like snack on a certain time schedule. I think whether we are aware of it or not. Like, I'm definitely one of those late afternoon snackers, sort of like you see in the peanut commercials. So especially working with you, I'm, try to be more aware, where my calories are going. So I think that helps. Like, oh, well, I don't usually put calories here. Do I need to? So tracking the food, knowing my macros, knowing, where my calories are plotted in, I think helps the process, adds a little more thought to it. And then if, again, sometimes snacking becomes its own activity or way to spend time or way to think about other things, I'll take it to the level of, could I replace food with something, which just means a beverage. Like, I'll be ingesting something, I'll enjoy a Coke Zero or water. Do I need to be eating now, or do I want just sort of some sort of ingestion-based activity? I can use a beverage. And then
Absolutely. I think that's really good. And that's a really good example of not trying to exercise willpower completely in a situation. It's about replacing something rather than completely absolving from the practice at all. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I think you also hit on a really good point, which is sort of the habituation of eating that can build sort of bad eating practices. So a common one is sometimes when people get home from work, the first thing that they do is eat. So whether they're hungry or not, even if they got home from work early or something like that, their inclination is to reach for snacks or something like that as a form of like passive entertainment, almost semi-passive entertainment. And the reality is, they're not actually even hungry. It's just that their brain is cued: trigger, get home, response, eat food, trigger, response. And then remember, the third part of that is reward, right? When we eat, we feel good because biologically we're programmed to eat for survival. So we have to interrupt that. And I think you brought up a really good way to do that, which is trigger remains, right? But change the response, change the reward. So response is something that's sort of pro behavior that we want to elicit, which is staying in the calorie deficit. And then the reward is obviously those things are satisfying enough to replace that. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That's a really, really good point, really actionable thing for people. One of the other things that can cause hunger is observable, but not as much understood why. But our bodies tend to have at a certain point in our life a natural set point for weight. And once we go below that weight, it may take time for our body to get used to being a lesser or greater weight. So our appetite may not align with our current body weight. So if we gain a significant amount of weight, say muscle, if you're getting bigger or something like that, it may be a struggle to continue to eat enough calories to sustain that because you don't have the appetite necessarily of that person yet. Or in the inverse, if you lose a significant amount of weight, you may still struggle with having the appetite of someone significantly larger than you currently are. So that's a struggle that can exist as well. And I think one of the other great points that you brought up was being able to distance yourself from the thoughts and feelings you have to the actions that you take. Having that space, being like the observer, as sometimes we talk about, I feel this way, but I will act in this way because it is aligned with my goals. So I think that's an important thing to consider there as well. And we've all felt like this cat right here. I know at a certain point, especially deep in the diet. So, one of the questions people ask is, what's actually happening when you go into a diet phase? Why does hunger increase in a diet? So having a good understanding as you do of sort of nutrition, why would you guess that someone might start to get hungrier as they diet?
I mean, especially the first week can be, system shock, because we all probably were existing, or I was consuming more calories than I thought I was consuming before a plan. So it's a big numeric change. But I would say in the beginning, yeah, I probably was more hungry. I remember talking to you about feeling really hungry at night and it being a more like physically uncomfortable sensation. And either I'm just less hungry at night or I don't feel like it is uncomfortable. It doesn't like keep me up or prevent sleep. Like that has gone a lot better. But in the beginning, it felt differently.
Yes.
Maybe because people are not hungry in America. I didn't need to call it America. I could have said the way I ate before, there was no room for hunger because I was just eating a lot and all the time. So it was probably in the beginning a new sensation I hadn't experienced because I was eating my way, especially through the pandemic.
Yes, I think that it is uncommon for people to experience true healthy hunger on a regular basis. There will be two patterns with like persistent fullness, or another pattern where people, they even surpass hunger, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and go to almost like a state of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, and then they binge eat, which is not uncommon too, especially with our computer work world, where people get on the computer for all day and never eat, and then eat a huge meal at night. So I think defining diet is important, since we're using that word. So when we say diet, we don't mean everything that you eat. In this context, we're using it to mean a calorie deficit, to encourage weight loss, right? So as you indicated, it's not uncommon for the first week or two of decreasing caloric intake to notice an extreme difference. Mostly it's your body trying to reevaluate sort of what was expected and what's no longer there. Now, it's not out of our biological programming to experience periods of feast and famine. We didn't survive as a species without being able to sustain over time. That's why we're so good at storing body fat. But it's going to be uncomfortable to a certain extent. So I think it's always good to remind ourselves that discomfort may arise. When you're in a calorie deficit, your ghrelin production can increase because your body is trying to elicit a response out of you. It's saying, hey, you don't have enough calories. You're hurting the machine. You're not operating efficiently. I'm going to remind you to go get more food, right? And we know that ghrelin means greater hunger, which is the way that we experience that sensation to go get us food. And that hunger by nature is a discomfort, right? It's not, being hungry is not necessarily a good feeling, but we can reevaluate that, which we'll talk about. Now, when you diet, one of the important things, like you indicated, which is great, is removing the emotional attachment of food and avoiding stress-triggered eating. Now, dieting is in and of itself a stress, right? So it's eliciting a stress response in the body. So dieting can elicit emotional stress as well. It can cause people to have depressive episodes, things like that. So making sure that we're hyper aware of, I'm intentionally putting myself in this situation. Here are some of the feelings that I can have associated with it, and not allowing us to get those to guide our behavior. I think also understanding that it's okay to be hungry, and it's actually expected to be hungry. Now, when you've dieted during our process in a more sustainable way, did you expect to be hungry?
Yes, I expected it to probably, I thought it could even be worse. And that's my own history, which you hit on. I've been guilty of that sort of crash dieting of ultra low calories, starvation level, extremely uncomfortable all day, sub 1,000 calories, but then it's not a sustainable system and can lead to binging. So in some respects, and we've discussed this was because it was so much more gradual and there were more calories than that starvation diet state. It was in some respects maybe more comfortable than I was expecting. But yes, I was going in expecting hunger, and it turned out to be not as bad as other things I've tried, which were more extreme.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I think that brings a really good point about a lot of what we do. Expectation versus reality creates either, joy or disappointment to a certain extent. So you expected things to potentially be worse. They were not as bad. So therefore you're like, this is pretty easy. Other people are misled by, nutrition marketing and fitness marketing to believe that there's a secret sauce that will allow them to lose weight without any discomfort or change to their lifestyle. And for those people, the minute that they experience hunger, they think that something is wrong. Where I screwed up, I messed up. But we have to normalize an appropriate and healthy amount of hunger while dieting in order to be prepared for it and handle it appropriately when it comes up. So the way that I like to help coach people on managing this is the hunger scale. And this is not a ranking from the Hunger Games, I promise, although that would be a useful exercise to explore. But on the scale, we're looking at, a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being like castaway desert island starvation, and then a 10 being the post-Thanksgiving nap. Now I'm going to share a term for you. Have you heard the word food coma before?
Oh, sure.
Do you know what the technical term for it is?
No.
Postprandial somnolence.
Wow.
Yeah, that'll win you trivia someday, I promise.
Right, some Jeopardy.
That's the Jeopardy word of the day. So this is our hunger scale. Now, we don't want to, as we always preach moderation, we don't want to end up at one of the extremes, right? So I like to quantify it this way for people. When you hit a 3 of hunger, that's when it's time to eat, right? Have you ever had how do you experience hunger? How does it show up for you during the day or on a usual basis?
That is probably the sensation of hunger, I think, is hard to describe. Think from Warner Brothers cartoons, like when we think of it or feel it, like we associate it with our stomach. And I'm not sure if that's actually a part of it. I mean, there's signs, if like thinking about food, obsessing about food, looking at pictures of food, sometimes that, matches up with where we're at on the hunger scale. But a physical sensation of feeling like you want to eat because the hunger sensation isn't comfortable, and eating will make it go away.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. And I think feeling the physical sensation puts you at that 3. So I think generally the conversation with oneself starts, I should eat. Food would be nice. I'm starting to feel my stomach starting to go. And then what we don't want to go is beyond that. Oh, I feel shaky or I feel weak or things like that. And if you're getting that low blood sugar, you've gone beyond that 3, right? So that's when to eat. Now, when to stop eating is also an important thing, right? So if we have our food planned out and our calories planned, we know when we're supposed to stop eating. But if we're just trying to eat more organically, in the sense, not eat organic food, but not necessarily track exactly, but just follow sort of what our body is telling us, we're eating slowly and appropriately. We want to eat till we're about a 6 or 7 out of 10 full, right? So we could eat more if we wanted to, but we feel fairly satisfied and full with the meal. So you'd want to eat to a 6 or a 7 at that point. Now, it's important to note that hunger may come throughout the day or the night. Some people unfortunately wake up and are hungry. But that may not always be hunger, as we discussed before. So an important thing, and I think you do a great job of this, is checking in with yourself and asking, am I hungry or am I tired? Am I hungry or am I stressed? Am I hydrated at this point? Have I had enough water throughout the day? That can lead to fatigue, which can lead to stress or eating like that. And another one that I didn't put on here also is this when I normally eat? So should I expect to eat right now? Am I used to coming home and eating, and I'm trying to break that pattern? So that's sort of an important check-in process whenever you're feeling hunger, if it's not at a normal time or something like that as well. And if you reach that time, it's important to remind yourself, hey, I'm on a diet. I'm expecting to be hungry, and expecting to be hungry at this time of day. So it's a normal and expected result of the calorie deficit that you've been in, right? As opposed to like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I don't know what to do with myself, right? Do you ever tell yourself like, hey, it's okay to be hungry?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I realized this earlier, what I didn't say was the hunger not only is okay, but lets me know I'm in a caloric deficit. Because in the very beginning, I thought the calories I was on was like too much. So the hunger doesn't bother me anymore, because it lets me know like, oh, good. Like I'm still in the deficit, like, calories in, calories out. Like, because if I just wasn't burning enough calories, or, I was just taking a lot in, then I wouldn't feel hungry. And that's not where I'm at right now in the plan we're working on, which is caloric deficit. So,
and I think that's a great cognitive reframe. Like, not only is this unpleasant feeling acceptable, but it's actually a good sign. I appreciate it for what it indicates.
Yes.
That's a powerful reframe.
And we've talked about this. Another reframe is like knowing that you're hungry or going into a meal hungry is going to make the food taste better. So when you're eating clean, that's a really important punch up. So like the ground turkey and broccoli I had for lunch was like delicious and super satisfying, because I went into it hungry, in a good way. And having lived the other side of the equation, where you're eating everything you want all the time, food can be overall less satisfying. But something like that may have actively been unsatisfying and not tasted good, because I was, swimming in simple sugars and fatty processed food.
That's a great point. And I think like it gives you a greater appreciation for food when you're dieting. And it's not to say that those other things aren't delicious, but sometimes when we overindulge, like the satisfaction or the appreciation or gratitude for those foods is reduced. We're going to get into some tips and tricks, but one thing that when I used to cut weight or diet for wrestling, If I was feeling very hungry and I wanted food, the test was always, you can eat, but the only thing you can eat is a can of unseasoned tuna fish in water. And if you're really hungry, you'll eat that. And if you're not going to eat that, then you're not really that hungry, and you can forget about it. And that was a good litmus test. And sometimes I would eat that, and at the worst, it was like another 100 or 120 calories and mostly protein, so it wasn't that bad. But more times than not, that sounded so unappealing, I realized that I wasn't that hungry. So, I want to share some of the tips that I've employed myself and that I've used with clients efficiently, and clients have shared with me that they've used. So one thing, having a plan to manage hunger and spreading meals out through the day is really important, as we've done. So planning the meal timing and spacing it out so you're not going to have long gaps without food. Making sure that you're not going to have those co-mitigating stressors in your life. So making sure you're sleeping plenty so blood sugar is regulated, hydrating properly, and managing stress so you're not getting those eating triggers that may trigger emotional eating. Reframing hunger, which I'm really glad you brought up, that cognitive reframe there. Using the hunger scale. So letting yourself know, hey, I'm in control of when it's time to eat and not time to eat, and I can manage that well. Making sure that you're eating plenty of protein, because we know it's muscle sparing, which keeps our metabolism up, but it's also more satiating generally than other macronutrients for most people. And along with that, consuming plenty of vegetables, and especially fibrous vegetables, since that's filler and causes bulk, which causes expansion of the stomach, which can create the feeling of fullness for people, which is important. Another one is avoiding trigger foods. So what's your favorite cheat food?
I don't know why this came to mind just now, but I'm just going to pick chicken wings because I know I don't want to eat 3 chicken wings. That wouldn't be satisfying. It's this very like, I go in 30 plus chicken wings. It's this whole thing. So it's like, no, I don't want a small order. I'm good. I eat a lot of other chicken. I don't need chicken wings at all.
Sure. I think that's a really good point, right? It's like, do I really want 2 spoons of ice cream, or do I just want to wait until I have time to eat the whole pint of ice cream? And I think some of those foods can be cascading and cause sort of a triggered binge as well. So we want to make sure that we avoid those mistakes that can happen and slip up. So that's a great point. Nobody wants 1 or 2 chicken wings. You want at least a dozen, right?
Which calorically, you can probably only have a few within budget.
Yeah. So I totally understand where you're coming from. And like, that's an important thing. I think people, my advice for most people is not to have cheat days within a diet phase, just to make sure that there's no opportunity for slip up there. But that's another area. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is eating mindfully and slowly. So my advice to people is always eat like you're on a first date, right? So if you're on a first date, hopefully people wouldn't be stuffing their face and just eating obnoxiously. You would eat, chew with your mouth closed, pause, speak with the other person, take a break, drink some water in between. And the reason that we do that is when we begin to eat, there's about 20 minutes before we start to feel full. So if we eat too quickly, we're going to override that feeling of fullness, and we can actually stuff a bunch of calories in extra before we start to feel full. If we space that meal out, we're going to feel full faster. So that's why a lot of times when you go to a restaurant, if you're focused on the people around you, the conversation, you'll notice that you can't even finish your plate because you get full quicker, which is especially useful. Another one is to eat breakfast to make sure that you don't create a low blood sugar dip throughout the day. This can be a habit for some people, not others, but generally the indication is that those that eat breakfast tend to eat fewer calories throughout the day total. And the last one is keeping a food journal to help with associating certain emotions with eating. So if emotional triggers can be an issue for some people, making note of how you feel when you eat or when you get hungry can help to disassociate the feeling with the response as well. So Jeremiah, have you ever employed any of these yourself?
Yes, doing a lot of planning meals at a time, allocating calories, reframing hunger. I'm protein heavy life form. I definitely keep an eye on the fiber. Got over
Like
my triggers.
protein heavy life form. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And yeah, there's still things I need to work on, slowing down. I'm a fast eater. All of us, probably need to look at this list and work through it. But yeah, it helps. Like thinking hunger can be your friend and your ally, because it's helping you get to where you want to be and the goals you want to hit. Like it does not need to be a horrible invasive life form. be struggling.
Yeah. Well, and I think success leaves clues, right? So I think you're doing a lot of the things that are on this list, maybe intuitively at this point, but that's a testament to sort of the process you've used to be so successful. And I think also, that point you keep bringing up, which is so important, I can't bring that home enough, is associating the sort of discomfort of hunger as a positive attribute of the experience. I think that's huge. Like if people can get there as you have, I think that's going to make a huge difference for them in terms of their outcome. So a few things that, I wanted to share to keep in mind as main points, and then maybe you can share some of yours that have made you successful as well. Or, as you're saying, you're supposed to be hungry on the diet. Like that is by definition part of the process. Focus on the joy of the outcome, which is a little bit grandiose, but focusing on, hey, like this is serving a larger purpose. So instead of having to satisfy yourself in the moment with food, saying perhaps I'm more focused on what this is going to bring me rather than how it feels currently. And that hunger is temporary, that this will pass and go. Is there any advice that you would give to someone that was entering into a diet about how hunger is going to affect them or how it may impact their process?
It gets better. It can be distracting and a whole new sensation in the beginning. Especially haven't, like me, experienced it in a long time. It definitely gets better. You'll definitely come to appreciate it. It'll make your meals feel better. And especially working with you, Brandon, I think people can take agency over where they want to put their calories. And I think that's huge. So for example, there's a lot of dieting meal plans out there where calories have to go in a very specific window, or a lot of caloric cutoffs at night arbitrarily, like no eating past 6 p.m., no this, no that. For me, I do not wake up hungry. I go to the gym, but I know I get hungrier as the day progresses, and I can get really hungry at night. So consistently working with you, my biggest meal has been dinner. Sometimes I save 1,000 calories for dinner of the calories I have. Usually it's more like 800. And I don't necessarily use them all at dinner, but for me, that was a pathway to success. Knowing I have the calories there, knowing I can sort of end big. And then guess what? There's no indication that has in any way interfered with like the success, we've had in the weight I've lost. And so maybe everyone could touch in and sort of think about, like, where are your crisis moments for calories? Do you actually physically get more hungry at different points of the day? And having calories there to meet that need.
Yeah, and I think we can, by planning our meals, prevent those big ups and downs that can throw us off. So if we have like a big crash, we're going to overeat potentially and rebound. But making sure, like, hey, even if I have like a 200 or 300 calorie snack at this gap in eating, it'll prevent me from binge eating or overeating to compensate later on. So planning ahead is huge. And I think, like you said, the big thing is in the process being successful generally is having control, right? And not there's what works on paper and what works with our personal behavior. And I think most people want control over their actions and they want control over the outcome for themselves. So having the ability to control your own destiny, I think cannot be overrated at all in all this. If you get to choose the rules that you follow, I think you're much more likely to follow through on them.
Yes. The template's all there and the guidelines, but your plan, has given me like agency and flexibility on where I want the calories to go. And for the vast most part, like what form they take. And that has been, game changing for me, where I feel it's heavily sustainable. And this has been all caloric deficit for months, since like April.
Yeah. And just a steady climb down. And soon there will be a calorie surplus.
Wouldn't even know what to do with it. But again,
I'm sure we